afternoon, everybody. I'm going to kick us off, and we'll see if anybody joins us in a moment or two. But good afternoon and welcome to the latest in our XR Network Plus seminar series. My name's Emma Brown. I'm the Programme Manager for XR Network Plus, and I'm delighted to welcome Colin and Daniyal along with us today, and I'll introduce them more in a moment or two. But first, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So the session is being recorded. And we're expecting the presentation to last about 30 minutes. And then we've got time for questions and answers. If you could post your question and answers in the Q&A box at the bottom rather than the chat, that would be fantastic. And my colleagues Dan and Sue will be fielding those in the background. We're expecting it to last so just under an hour or so, but please feel free to post as many questions as you like. And first, I'd like to now introduce our speakers. So we have Colin West from the University of Portsmouth School of Creative Technologies. He's a senior lecturer in computer animation and visual effects. And we have Daniyal Aslam, who is the lead Unreal technical director and compositor, working with Dark Cosmos Creative.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not going to waste any more time introducing the project because really we all want to hear from you two. So I'm going to hand straight over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Emma. So, hello everybody, and welcome to our talk on photoreal's CG asset acquisition for AI-enhanced feature films. This was really a team of 7. I was a co-investigator on the project alongside Dr. Brett Stevens and Nikki Wakefield, and I'm joined today with Daniyal Aslam, who's our project manager and specialist Unreal technician. And our technical artists were also Ginny Sutton and Maya Mystery. And our principal investigator on the project was our head of school, Dr. Adrian Hull. And before we kind of go into it, we'll do a little bit of an overview for today. What I really kind of want to start off with before we kind of get into the guts of our project as a whole is to have a little bit of a context of the pipeline of CGI and visual effects based films and how that correlates to virtual production based films and how we adapted those pipelines for our collaboration with Dark Cosmos Creative, who's the project that we were kind of working with as well. We'll also talk about digidoubles, because that's our photorealistic CG assets that we're kind of looking at enhancing, and face replacement technology that we've been utilizing, and our focus within that overall pipeline. And Dan's going to take over and talk about our collaboration with DCC and our pipeline on that particular project itself. So if we kind of take a quick look at a traditional CGI or visual effects based project pipeline, I've done a gross simplification of the pipeline here itself, but realistically, our work is very, very heavy in post-production. So anything that happens after principal photography. Now, that's not to say that VFX is not involved at all cases throughout the entire production, because we are heavily involved in pre-production planning of the entire project, because we might be involved with pre-visualization, technical visualization, as well as helping with the creative team in terms of coming up with the narrative itself. Similarly, in production itself, we'll be there on set when it comes to shooting, particularly visual effects based shots, to make sure that our studios will have all of the necessary data, for instance, camera tracking data or motion capture or asset acquisition whilst we're there on set. But as you can kind of see from these film slides from Infinity War, the majority of the work to take it from the principal photography plate to the final composite that you see on the cinema screen is the bulk load of the work. And particularly in green screen heavy or blue screen heavy films, most of the world needs to be generated by us after the principal photography has been taken as well. And that includes any characters. So if there are CG characters, they will have to be modeled and rigged for animators to be able to work with. It needs to be then animated and then lit and rendered and composited to make it feel as though it was all shot all at the same time and composited within the same frame. So yeah, a vast amount of our work was done after principal photography. If we compare this to a virtual production pipeline, which is in recent years really taking off since highly popularized by the ILM show, The Mandalorian. All of the bulk load of that work needs to be done now in pre-production, or at least pre-principal photography. And the reason for this is that we now have the technology, rather than replace out the green screens with the digital world, we're able to put an actor on an LED stage, basically a huge screen, and set dress it so that we can project the digital world into the real world and shoot it all within camera. That means all of the world, all of the characters need to have been done to final quality level before the virtual production shoot can take place. So now we're entering a phase where, although a lot of that VFX work would be done in post-production, we now have to shift the bulk load of that before the actual shoot can take place. Now, although it would be, sorry, Dan, if you could step back a second. Although it would be ideal that we could capture all of this one for one in camera, realistically, it's never goes that way at the minute. We still need to prepare that we might have to do post work, and we'll certainly never really negate that, because it limits creative choices for the directors and for the studios. So as you can see in that second Mandalorian shot in the bottom left, they are still acquiring green screen footage, even though it's on a VP stage, so that they can do work in post-production, primarily in compositing. So it somewhat elongates the process in some regards, in terms of where visual effects and CGI are incorporated, but there are huge benefits for it. If we step forward, there we go. So one of the things with virtual production to really highlight, though, is environment creation. And we'll kind of touch on this in terms of our pipeline as well, is that because of its nature, you're photographing real people and putting them in the digital world. Those environments need to hold up in visual fidelity to the real world, especially if you're coupling that with a longer film project where you do have real locations, and mixing that in with virtual production sets. So photorealism is absolutely key when it comes to virtual production environment sets. And most of the time, studios will revert to using photogrammetry, which is the idea of capturing either small assets or entire sets using hundreds, if not thousands, of photographs to combine them into a mesh. And there are entire suites or asset packs that people can utilize. One popular method is to use the Unreal Engine, and then that gives you access to something like Quixel Megascans, which is some of these top left slides are from as well. That's not the only thing that we can utilize. We can use DMP, or digital matte paintings, which was technically would come in the compositing kind of phase of a traditional pipeline, we can actually embed those digital matte paintings into our virtual production sets, so that rather than having to model or acquire photorealistic assets, we can actually do photo manipulation and matte painting to bring it in. The last thing on that is it can be quite challenging to work within a real-time engine to get that level of visual fidelity to make it feel completely photoreal. But it's an evolving field, and with each update of these real-time engines, we're getting kind of closer and closer to bridging that quality gap. When it comes to digital doubles, particularly for visual effects based films or virtual production, this has evolved over time. These kind of slides, these top ones are actually from behind the scenes of Terminator 2. So this is Robert Skinner getting scanned into his mesh that was then utilized for a lot of the liquid effects and was combined with practical effects as well. Most of the time nowadays, we're using photogrammetry. So we have DSLR rigs in which maybe 50 to about 100 cameras all fire at the same time to capture a mesh of the character. There's still a heavy amount of work that is required to be done to those rough scans to turn it into an animatable character. So these bottom slides of Hugh Jackman, on the left, you'll see the reference photography from the photogrammetry shoot, and then the final CG render. But that's not to say that you get that immediately back out. Again, there's a vast amount of work, large teams that go into creating these digidouble actors, especially if they're to sit and embed well with VFX based plates as well. This isn't the only method of doing digidoubles, and it's not the only use case for them as well. In a lot of effects-based shots, we might have to do face replacement elements. And yeah, you might use a digidouble for that, or additional footage, or some compositing tricks to do that too. But in this regard, a lot of times you might have a stunt double that is being filmed, and we might have to replace out their face either seamlessly or not, depends on the shot. But yeah, we need to kind of get the primary actor or the principal actor's face onto the stunt double. And the techniques have evolved throughout film history to now. And primarily, I wanted to kind of talk about some of the techniques that they were using on the latest Indiana Jones film for this, in that they were doing de-aging of Harrison Ford. Now, Harrison Ford was in the shot rather than a body double, but they then did a digi-double version of him. So they scanned him and then worked on his CG work to kind of de-age him. And on top of that, they were using machine learning or deepfake technology trained on his earlier face to help with the likeness when it comes to the final composites. And we're using some of these techniques on our small scale kind of indie project as well. Now, when it comes to AI and machine learning, it's really important that all studios and users are very much aware on what the data was trained upon, because there are models out there that have used what's known as data scraping. So they're grabbing images or sources from public domain and kind of training their algorithms off of that. However, it can be very concerning that artist's work or imagery work has been used to train these models. It's really important that the studios or users are very much aware of that and are using it in an ethical way. And yeah, these models can be trained on images that we create or own or source from other artists. And if they are sourced, they do need to be given specific consent to be used for AI purposes. And importantly, the AI algorithm is only really as diverse as the images that it gets trained upon. And this can produce biases in the images or the outcomes that the machine learning algorithm will put out as well. This bottom image is a use case from Houdini in which they're training an algorithm to speed up terrain-based simulation by doing contour analysis. So this was trained off of a data set that they generated out of thousands of simulations themselves. So again, it is really important in terms of understanding how these AI sets are actually trained. So in terms of our work and our overall project, although I've been talking about large-scale, big-budget projects, we're looking at the accessibility of these techniques on a much smaller scale, much smaller budget scale. So indie studios, independent artists, how can we take these techniques and put it in the hands of more people, smaller scale studios, and look at the timelines kind of involved as well. We are by no means kind of getting rid of any other part of the pipeline, especially with big studios. They will invest the time and effort into those larger based pipelines because of their needs, and there are very specific use cases for the pipeline that we're going to present. And with that, I'll hand over to Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, just to sort of build on that as well. It's the great thing about these techniques is that they are a mishmash of sort of traditional techniques, and you can't sort of do this without having those traditional techniques in place as well. So we worked in collaboration with Dark Cosmos Creative on this project. They are a local to Portsmouth VFX studio, and they're currently working on a independent film called Zombie JJ. It's due for release in November 2024. So a lot of the work that we did was for this film. But because the film is still in post-production, we can't share the work that we've done for the film. But what we've done is we prepared a test shot to sort of demonstrate the methods that we used, the methods that we tested and devised, to show the how. And then obviously when this film comes out, we'll be able to talk more about that then. So research and development was really focused on these steps of a test pipeline. So we wanted to focus on creating an environment, creating a character, animating that character, applying some cinematography, so putting our lighting and our camera work in, and then using those face replacement techniques through machine learning to sort of take our shot to that final level. And I'll explain why when we get into characters. But to begin with, we first looked at creating environments. So I think Colin sort of explained the normal process for creating an environment. It's very involved. It could take a great deal of time. We're looking at 6 months for a location. And what we were really looking at as a way to sort of cut that time down is NeRFs, which are neural radiance field. So they're machine learning based spatial captures. So what you do is you take photographs or film footage of a given location. So this was taken in a courtyard not too far from where I live. And it turns it into this spatial environment that you can sort of move around freely. And it sort of retains a lot of 3D data. The problem with doing this traditionally through photogrammetry is that you can use this to generate a 3D mesh. But colors and reflections are static, they're baked in and they can't be changed. So you have to recreate your meshes and create new textures for them, which is a big part of the very involved process that we were talking about earlier. The great thing about this is though, if you keep an eye on like windows in the cars, is as the camera moves, the reflection moves with them. And that's called parallax. So as your camera's moving, you can see how things move in 3D around them. And that's a big part of selling an effect. In visual effects, it's something that people spend a lot of time on getting right. So this is a very quick way of getting something that's actually physically accurate, interactive, and that you can use as either a starting point for environment creation, or in our example case, just use it as the environment. So that's one example. We also looked at, oh, sorry, bear with me. We also looked at this one as well, which is not playing for some reason. There we go. And this was actually one of the film locations that we were capturing for. So the great thing about this method is it can take less than 10 minutes to capture it, which is great if you're a VFX supervisor on set. It's quick and you get a very quick result. You can even do a capture on your phone and hit upload, and while you're working, it'll be processing in the background. And when you look at it 2 or 3 hours later, you've got an environment ready to go. So it's taking a process that would have taken 6 months, and you've got it in less than a day. It's also using out-of-the-box software. So we used Luma AI to train our nerves and Gaussian splats, which I'll talk about in a second. And we used Unreal Engine to use them in terms of lighting and stuff, lighting and camera work. So the reason we picked nerfs is for the reasons I've said. It's got those specular reflections that move with the camera, and it takes a lot of time. Gaussian splatting, I mentioned, is just an alternative to nerfs. It's a similar type of thing. And Gaussian splatting generally has better fidelity. So some use cases might prefer Gaussian splatting, but the reason we settled on nerfs, sorry, is because it comes with geometric data, which is necessary for later steps in the visual effects pipeline. So yeah, that's sort of where we settled on environments. We also sort of developed a best practice guide for how to capture the nerfs to get the best data out of them. So we sort of built on the work that previous publications have sort of put out there, and geared it more towards a film visual effects sort of specification. In terms of our character creation process, we talked a bit, I think Colin talked a bit about photogrammetry and how we do this normally. This is Colin, if you can tell. So we thought it'd be good to have Colin in this example so you can see how either real or not real certain parts of the pipeline look. So the great thing about photogrammetry is we use the rig at CCIXR, that's the University of Portsmouth Centre for Creative and Immersive Extended Realities. And this is their photogrammetry suite. So we took a photogrammetry scan of Colin. It took less than a minute. You press a button and all the cameras go. And then using some software over a few hours, that generates a 3D mesh from those photographs. And then we use those in combination with mesh to MetaHuman. So MetaHumans are Unreal Engine's solution to DigiDoubles. They're still very much a work in progress, but we wanted to see how far we could push them. And using that, we were able to generate a MetaHuman of Colin with very similar face proportions. We also developed a way to get body proportions right. This example doesn't show that, but there's additional plugins and stuff that you can get for Unreal Engine, like Mesh Morpher, if you wanted to spend more time on shaping the body correctly. So the reason we used MetaHumans is because they're ready to animate. A lot of the, like in the Hugh Jackman example that Colin showed earlier, it would have taken artists a great deal of time to build a rig to get that 3D model to actually move in a way that a human would move. Metahumans have a rig out of the box, and they have a face rig as well, so they're completely ready to animate, which saves a lot of time in that character creation process. Obviously, this doesn't look quite like Colin, which is the caveat, but we talk about how we move on from that a bit later. So I won't go too much into detail on this slide, but this is just an example of what a traditional digi-double pipeline would look like, a bit like the one Colin was explaining. How a more involved custom metahuman, if you wanted the metahuman to really look like the person that you're taking the scan of, and then our method where we've combined the metahuman with a few AI techniques that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. And it's really cutting that production process down. So a traditional digi-double could take 6 months. Spending time on refining a metahuman could take a couple of weeks. And our method is roughly about a week, 2 weeks. And that's for one artist to do all of this work. With that said, all of this work does involve a certain technical understanding of the process. But the great thing about a lot of the Unreal Engine and MetaHuman stuff is that there's loads of resources out there. It is free to use, and people are often quite vocal in the Unreal Engine community about sharing tips and techniques. So the information is out there and it's fairly accessible. And the great thing is about Unreal Engine and MetaHumans is if you're an independent filmmaker, for example, you don't have to spend as much money or as much time on the post-production process if you were to sort of lean more towards these techniques. So in terms of animating our characters, we used a couple of different methods. So for animating faces, we used NVIDIA's audio to face, and what that does is you put in a voice recording of dialogue, and it generates the face animation for you. So this is an example that we did early in the project where we can see the little dialogues happening and it's animating our face. The great thing about audio to face is that it happens in real time. So as soon as you've set this up, which doesn't take very long at all, you literally just need to select your audio file. You can hit play in audio to face, and you can record it live into Unreal Engine. So that can be done in like 10 minutes. And normally hand animating or taking motion capture animation would take a lot longer. We also just took some stock animations from Adobe Mixamo. That's a motion capture library. It's free to use. And we retargeted them onto our MetaHuman. This is not a finished animation, but it gives you a rough example of what we were trying to do. So yeah, talking about audio to face again, there's a few different ways we could get face animation. The one example on the left is a much more classic motion capture shot. So that would require a lot of cleanup. So the animation wouldn't be perfect out of the box. It would require a lot of fixing, and that on its own could take a while to do. There is more in terms of real-time face animation at the moment, especially using iPhones and ARKit. So you can also do that in real time. The reason we decided not to was A, because that could also involve cleanup, and B, talking about trying to cut costs, having your actors in to do that kind of capture would cost more money because you have to pay your actors for longer. Whereas you're probably getting audio recordings of all their dialogue anyway. That's normally a standard practice for a film. So to use that to drive the animation just saves a bit more cost in that sense as well, and time as well. So that's animation, characters and environments. In terms of cinematography, we used Unreal Engine to do this, and the time this takes really depends on the shot that you're creating. But we spent some time lighting our Nerf environment to suit the scene. We were going for like an evening kind of scene. So Colin here is lit by streetlights. And this took about 2 hours to go from having our character ready, animations ready, and an environment ready to getting that all lit with a camera in an environment. the great thing about Unreal Engine as well is it's quite flexible in how you do camera animation. You can do it in a classic way by keyframing it in 3D space, or you can use virtual production techniques to get like a live link on a screen, and a director of photography could have a physical screen where, like camera rig type thing, it's called VCam, where they can move it around and get a feel for the space and the shots that they want to create. So the next step for us was working on how to get a very quick, rapid prototype metahuman to look anything like Colin. It was so we decided to use some deepfake technology for this. So we took more photos of Colin doing different expressions, and we used that to train our own bespoke deepfake model. Now, normally a deepfake model would take probably about a week, if not longer, depending on your hardware, to get a good result out of. And we were really trying to push this to its limits and see how quickly we could get stuff done. So using Comfy UI, which is a container for a lot of sort of cutting edge AI deep learning models at the moment, we were able to train a very low quality deepfake, which is the one you see here, in just a few hours to get the movements right and to get his face. But obviously it's quite low quality, it's very noticeable. And then using Comfy UI and those AI techniques, we were able to upscale that and get something with high fidelity. And this only took a few seconds to get from this to this, which is remarkable. It's fairly groundbreaking, it's fairly new. So we're very pleased with how that's gone. So now we've gone from a crappy looking metahuman to a fairly realistic face. There's obvious giveaways in this example. Again, it is a rapid prototype just for demonstration purposes. But I'm hoping you can see like the trajectory of how things move from A to Z. So in terms of integrating this, Colin mentioned compositing. So every VFX shot goes through compositing, and that doesn't really change for this pipeline as well. We can see progressively how this was our first version of compositing, which doesn't look too bad, but it's very flat. It looks it's very much still in the uncanny valley at this stage. But with a few more days and a bit of refinement and expertise sprinkled in by Cosmos Creative, we were able to take it to looking like this, which is a fairly photorealistic shot. It's not perfect. It's again, it is a demonstration shot. So if this was a film shot, we would have spent a lot more time refining other bits of the shot. So this is our result, basically, from all that work. So we've taken 6 months of work, which it would normally take to get to this, and we've squeezed it into less than 2 weeks, which is fantastic. And it's really been a case of using a combination of traditional techniques, virtual production, and AI to speed that process up and to get something that's true to reality. So this is a bit of a breakdown just to show how we moved through the different stages. That's short. And there's just a little comparison there. So I mentioned earlier that we could have spent more time on refining the metahuman result. So Colin's gonna jump back in and talk a bit about how that would work.
Cool. So yeah, in terms of advancing the baseline character, when it comes to these deepfake shots, it depends on the data set that you've trained. If you were dealing with more complex angles, then you would need to have a data set that's capable of handling those input images. And one thing that might alleviate some of those problems is by spending a bit more time advancing the baseline character. So this is some additional time spent in Mesh to MesiHuman to try and improve the initial likeness. Again, there are some limitations with that itself. Mainly the Mesh to MesiHuman process takes your baseline scan and tries to fit it within its parameterized model and symmetrizes it as well, which kind of gets rid of the asymmetry that naturally occurs in your face. And that means getting a complete true likeness for a digidouble means that you have to alter a file called a MesiHuman DNA file, which is up until this point been quite a complex process. And if you're going to go to the next slide, we'll show what some of that kind of looks like as well. So this is taking back the original scan data and blending it into the MesiHuman to try and get that uniqueness back from the original character by altering those DNA files and altering the blend shapes. There is even further advancement that needs to take place, because when you your character expresses and goes through the different rigged animations, it's actually blending in certain wrinkle maps and blood flow maps. But again, if you want it to be unique to yourself, you need to make all of them custom to the character that you're doing. So it's always like a trade-off. You kind of need to think about how advanced you want to go with the MesiHuman versus how much you want to use the deepfake to advance your likeness afterwards as well. So in terms of advancing this research into the future, areas that we are really interested in is this accessibility of improving the likeness. It is quite technically challenging, and you would need quite a specialist to be working on that part of the pipeline. So we want to look at methods of how we can at least make it a bit more accessible for independent artists or small-scale studios. Similarly, in terms of being an academic institution, how do we build a pipeline or training material for the next generation of VFX and virtual production artists, so that they can start implementing these more advanced techniques into their own projects, which will lead into the industry going forwards as well. And alongside that, again, where we currently are with Gaussian splats and other environmental kind of creation techniques, how do we advance that going forwards as well? So further investigation into those areas as well. Yeah.
I think that's the meat of it. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yep.
That's really
Thanks so much.
fascinating. So please do post any questions in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screens, everybody. I was just reflecting on you sort of the litany of off-the-shelf technologies that you've been using, and the expertise that must have taken. And I wonder if you could say, obviously things are moving so fast in that space. How recently have you been able to actually do this sort of piece of work with all those off-the-shelf technologies? Because could you have done this a year ago or 18 months ago, or is it moving that fast?
I think a year ago, potentially. 18 months is a stretch. You're right to point that out. I think there is a lot of that sort of evolution of technology, and it's happening at a very fast pace. A lot of the work that we did sort of behind the scenes that we haven't necessarily talked about was getting Unreal Engine to work in a way that would satisfy a lot of the visual effects requirements for a film. And Unreal Engine wasn't necessarily designed for that purpose. So we had to build a lot of workarounds to make that work. And then I think the week that we wrapped up the project, Unreal released their newest version of the software, which solved about half of those issues. So there is sort of that element of things are moving forward at a very fast pace. And like the Gaussian splatting and Nerf example, we had to rule out Gaussian splatting a while ago, but again, in the last couple of weeks of the project, there was some hint that there were new things being implemented which might have addressed and sort of fixed some of the issues we were having.
Yeah, similarly,
Interesting.
I think Indiana Jones released during our project as well. So it was interesting to kind of see how there were parallels there. But up until that point, obviously deepfakes had been used in other productions, but not necessarily in terms of de-aging or enhancing the likeness of a similar character. It's more like a face replacement kind of technique. So yeah, it's always moving. And as you said, because there's a variety of different stages that we're looking at, any advancement in any one of them could change the entire pipeline as a whole. So it is a bit of a juggling act, to tell you the truth, when it comes to it. But I think that's why it's important that we're looking at that pipeline and that accessibility, because when it comes to these independent studios or artists, we don't want them to be completely disrupted with just one kind of small update that would derail them potentially.
And how quickly is it moving from, Harrison Ford being de-aged into the possibility of you being able to use it in the sort of level and project that you've been looking at?
I think we're not too far off it. A lot of the sort of technical and visual requirements that make photorealistic visual effects work don't necessarily work out of the box. And I think that's where Dark Cosmos Creative, the visual effects studio that we were partnered with, their involvement was quite helpful, because they are at the sort of forefront of that research and development. They are pushing the boundaries of the field, as it were. And because they've been doing that and they know what they're doing with that, it was useful to have that expertise sort of fall into place. It definitely made a lot of what we were doing possible, even though it didn't necessarily seem like it could be. And I think collaboration is key as well. This is such a massive and vast, expansive industry. There's so many different moving parts in a post-production or film pipeline, especially with virtual production in the mix. So it's quite not everyone has all the expertise. So I think even though it might not seem like there's necessarily a solution to stuff, you never know. By having conversations with people who have a slightly different specialism, they might be able to put a different sort of perspective on it. And you might try things that would have seemed ridiculous 5 years ago, but actually work quite well now.
Can I ask how many people work at Dark Cosmos, just to give an idea of that sort of level of collaboration that's needed?
Yeah, it's a very small studio. I think they scale up and down as is needed. There's just a few, like 2 or 3 people working there at the moment, and they work with freelancers like myself quite often, depending on the projects that they're working on. So for this particular project, I think the collaboration was really with myself and with the university, as well as like we've all got our own sort of professional networks that have their own sort of expertise as well, and that all sorts of feeds back in.
Yeah, absolutely. That, as Daniel says, the collaboration and communication is absolutely key for any successful visual or any film project at all. And by having us come at it from 2 different directions in terms of, okay, well, how do we kind of advance this pipeline and how do we kind of make that accessible? Whereas it working on a live VFX film brief helped elevate each and every individual part as well, because they would come at it from different techniques. Because although we were using some deep fake technology, realistically for kind face swapping or de-aging. These effects have existed in film for a very long time, and they were just far more labor intensive, I guess. And it's not getting rid of any of those techniques. It's incorporating those previous skills with advancements in technology as well.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That you know the traditional techniques that are still being used, and you know, where do you think the skill set's going to be in 5-10 years time, or what? You know, 10 years sounds like an infinity away in this space, doesn't it? But in 5 years time, what other sort of skill sets that people are going to need in order to create a film?
Colin, I don't know if you want to jump in as well. I would see this personally, and this is more personal view than educating us, is there's always been a little bit of a separation between sort of art and technology. So you'd have your technical team and you'd have your artistic team, and they'd sort of deal with their own thing. But as these new techniques to create the art involve more tech, I think one of the things that is bound to happen, and I think should happen, again, personal view, is that there's more overlap. So I think that's why you see more like technical artists that you'd get more often in the game industry than the VFX industry. But that's sort of coming to visual effects. But Colin, yeah, please.
Yeah, next 5 years, well, as you said, going further is hard to project into, but I think we will see further adaptation and integration of these new techniques. It's not that people should be scared of them. I think we need to embrace them in an ethical way, in terms of how can we use the tools to handle not necessarily even the donkey work there. How do we get back to the creative problems and get our sight on that? For instance, with tool building, it makes more productive sense to have the computer do a lot of the heavy lifting, but you will always need trained artists to know what to do with the end result. And especially in this kind of time where things are evolving, a lot of the stuff that you're getting out of the algorithms are nowhere near use case ready. But as those kind of gaps go, the computer still doesn't know what to do with that. You will always need an artist and an artist's vision to know how to handle that. And I think it will enable us to be far more creative. One thing I definitely have seen is that the accessibility of these tools and techniques is more readily available than ever before. And that's a fantastic thing, because it means that people who might have never considered going into this field, we now have access to that. Like, you should end up with more creatives, more interesting stories and projects by easing that entry bar that used to be incredibly steep before. It still is. The level of things that you do need to know within your specialism is still very high, and the audience's expectation is always growing as well. But just the sheer fact that we may have more creatives interested in getting into this line of work is a fantastic prospect.
See you guys creators moving into that space, or does it still seem to be quite you know, technology heavy sort of people who are interested in the space?
I think it can attract people that kind of maybe straddle both, like either tech and art, definitely, and it does help people having an interest in both. Within the industry, you still have specialists who are like only interested in the tech or only interested in the artistry form, but it's where you kind of get that blend. Again, I think it's where that communication is absolutely key. But I think nowadays so much people are interested in forms of entertainment that just simply lowering that bar and giving them the idea that it's possible for them too should lead to really interesting things.
And the great thing about, just to build on that, is like you had to go out of your way to find out how a film was made 10, 20 years ago. You'd have to go and find the behind the scenes to get a rough idea of what was going on. But we're in the information age, we're in the age of social media. There's so much content out there and accessible content, which shows people the work that we do. And I think it does make people more appreciative of it. And it's like Colin says, the more people are aware of it, the more likely they are to sort of buy into that.
So I've got a couple of questions in our chat. John's asking, what's your dream AI tool that doesn't exist yet?
Colin, do you want to go first?
My dream AI tool. Lecturing or in terms of films? I think there are some really interesting developments that are happening with machine learning within the visual effects space, particularly in, it seems like Side Effects Houdini have really embraced that tool set in an ethical kind of way in terms of making things that would normally take a very long time. For instance, simulations, where we can maybe make that a little bit faster and again more accessible to people that might want solutions to that. So dream AI tool. Yeah, maybe some stuff alongside like what simulations might have to be assisted by AI. I don't think you'll ever get, I need my fluid simulation to go in this direction and making a splash here, and an AI would do it. I mean, that'd be interesting. But again, I still think you will always need an artist and a TD in that case to get the best out of that.
Yeah, my dream AI tool, I really don't know. I think obviously I use AI in visual effects, but the deepfake stuff, for example, and the nerves and everything. And I think those are great. They do have limitations, so I would like to see those advanced a bit further. But I really like to use AI tools for productivity. So I do use ChatGPT to like help me write code sometimes. Just because it speeds up the process of if I had to do that myself. So I'd like an AI assistant that actually works as an AI assistant. I know there's loads of people out there branding AI assistants, but one that would actually, I don't know, do things for me. That would be great. So I can focus on the creative stuff.
I've got one last question. I think we'll draw it to a close. And the person who's posted this has said it's more of a comment than a question. So they're saying that they're wondering how this will impact shoots and schedules and budgets and making choices as about what will be done in real time and what will be left till post, and how it will impact the number of people on set and shoot days, etc. It feels like being a first AD is going to need a whole new set of skills. More comment than question. So I don't know whether either of you want to respond to that.
Yeah, I can. So I was actually the on-set VFX person for Zombie JJ, the film that we were working on. So I got to see firsthand how that all shifted and how that was different. I think as the first AD was still doing everything the first AD would do. I think there were a few more things in terms of organization that impacted, like the filmmakers behind Zombie JJ knew what Dark Cosmos Creative were going to try and do in terms of the pipeline. So the main difference in terms of production was making sure that they had the data that we would need, so that we were getting photogrammetry scans. So it's factoring in things like scanning and that type of thing into a shoot schedule. The great thing about it as well is that if you've like missed something on set, but you have a scan of the location, you have reference footage of stuff that was filmed on set, and you've got the audio you're recording, our pipeline is sort of designed to fill in those gaps. So it alleviates some of those budget constraints. in terms of the practical on-set work, which is generally more expensive than the post-production work because you need to pay for actors to be there, you need to pay for catering, locations, etc. So the idea, I guess, of this pipeline as well is to sort of reduce those costs and get more for less money. Yeah, the main difference is factoring in those, like getting those scans, getting the photogrammetry scans, making sure you have a VFX person on set, but then that would be the case for any VFX production.
Yeah, alongside those things, I think in terms of it really comes down to the design of the project and again what they kind of want to get out of it. In terms of talent involved, again, it comes down to the training use cases. I think, well, they all had to know that they were going to be scanned and their likenesses were going to be used. So that was all kind of signed off as well. Because as you can imagine, anybody say, oh, hang on, I wasn't actually in that scene, but they've somehow done a meta-human version. That's not okay at all. And those are real problem cases. But I think we need to go into these projects knowing exactly kind of what you want to get out of them. Some of these things might not use, but data captured gives you options. For instance, if that's a photogrammetry scan or a LiDAR scan or a NERF, even if you don't potentially use it, just being there on set and capturing it for half an hour gives you a wealth of options in production and in post. Some things that wouldn't be used, so those NERFs have some limitations. You wouldn't be able to do very easy set extensions with those, which if you were doing a larger visual effects based shoot, you would likely have to do either in DMP or something along those kind of lines. But as long as your VFX suit and your creative team are aware of what you require going into the production, then I think it just gives you options, really.
I think people have always sort of traditionally said the common phrase is fix it in post. And visual effects people hate that phrase because there's loads of stuff that you can fix on set. But there are things that just, it doesn't make sense to fit them on set. It's more time effective for you to get people on set, off set as quickly as possible. And having a VFX person on set to capture reference data, stuff like measurements, capturing lighting conditions, all of those things just make that visual effects process easier. So to fix stuff in post, it's useful to have a VFX presence on set and in pre-production as well, because you need the right data to be able to fix it in post.
Yeah. I think importantly as well is, you may see some impact at larger scale budgets. My deal has never been really about like cost cutting. It's more about, again, enabling the smaller scale studios to have access to storytelling and effects and elements in their films that would be impossible or outside of their budgetary constraints beforehand. So there will kind of be a bit of a trade-off. Some of the larger studios might see it as like, I can use this stuff to kind of expedite my production, but on the other scale, you'll have smaller scale, more creative projects that are able to do way more elaborate projects than before.
Yeah, I've always been a very big creative thinker, and I've always gone for way too ambitious ideas at my own detriment. And I think Colin was my supervisor a very long time ago. And I had these massive ideas, but there was no way to realize them in the amount of time that I had, because it just wasn't possible at the time. Whereas now I'm starting to see some of those bigger ideas come to fruition in my spare time because the tools are there. It still takes time and it still takes a lot of work, but it's just much more accessible than it was however long ago.
Thank you both. That was fascinating, and I'm going to draw it to a close with two things. Number one, I just would like to point out to everybody that Colin and Daniyal were funded by our R&D funding call, and the second round of that funding call is open now. So if what you've heard has inspired you at all, then please do go onto the XR Network Plus webpage, and the calls close on the 19th of June. So you could be stepping in the footsteps of Colin and Daniyal if you are interested in doing some R&D. And last but not least, I just want to say thank you very much to both of you. That was fascinating, and can't wait to see what comes next. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes.